yourself in the loop of everything football on the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. The latest news on and off the field, be it college football, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC to the NFL. We've got you covered. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Football Podcast, hosted by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Ethan Orfe, alongside Brice Lewis.
Yes, sir.
And we're going to talk about what we just finished watching was the Monday Night Football game, which was a surgical performance by Mr. Number 9, Mr. New Orleans, Mr. All Cool Breeze.
Yes. Breeze set a couple records tonight. He passed Peyton Manning for all-time touchdowns in a career, and also set the record for completion percentage in the game because he was 29 of 30 tonight, 300 yards and 4 touchdowns. Breeze was just all around great tonight, and it was just a great night in general. Usually, these Monday night games, usually when there's a record that needs to be broken or something historic is happening or some type of reunion for Saints on Monday Night Football, it usually ends up in a blowout, which we got tonight, which the Saints beat the Colts 34-7. So, Ethan, what is your initial thoughts on the game and Drew Brees' record-breaking night?
I think what it does for the Saints is it was a good thing that it was an easy game for them. I don't like to say that some games are easy in the NFL, but that game, it was easy in a sense that we needed a break because there's a lot of players getting hurt on the defensive side of the ball, and we just needed to catch a break. We needed something that was a little bit easy, for lack of a better term. They needed something to make sure that everybody was still tuned up, ready to go for next week. But also, it wasn't a hard-fought battle because the playoffs are about to begin, and the road ahead is about to get a little bit tougher as they face the Titans next week, which will be a really good game. So, it really looked like it was a practice out there.
You think it's a practice pretty much for what you've seen and everything?
Just the way the game turned out to be. It looked like Drew Brees went against the practice squad. And he was surgical. He missed only one pass. What more did he need to do?
That typical Drew Brees performance. Yeah, I mean, really this entire game was dominated by the Saints, like you said. They nearly doubled the Colts in total yards, almost doubled them passing, 117 to 46 in rushing yards, and just completely overwhelmed the Colts tonight. The Colts, ever since starting 5-2, it really fell off. It's just, we don't know if it's the Andrew Luck thing or it's the injuries, T.Y. not being healthy the whole year, but just, you can tell this team just doesn't have the juice anymore for the rest of this season at least. And they're going to have some things they have to go back into the offseason and really try to work on. But like I said, tonight is a night for the Saints and Drew Brees. And also, this is also when they need it because this helps them stay afloat in the NFC playoff picture, keeping them to the top 3. But also, in next week when Minnesota and Green Bay play, if Minnesota wins and the Saints also can take care of business in Tennessee, they will end up getting one of the top 2 seeds going into Week 17, and all they have to do is win, and they should be able to get it, and they'll clinch it, and all of those things. So anything that you felt like we didn't talk about in terms of maybe just didn't stand out or wasn't as obvious as usual, like, because obviously we know this nice about Drew Brees and everything he's done, but it looks like the Saints were basically clicking from all cylinders. Would you agree?
On offense, yeah, this was the best Saints offense performance aside from last week's, which was pretty good as well. But Kamara looked pretty good. He didn't have the best yardage game, but as far as burst, speed, when he got in the open field and had some moves, he looked a little shifty, and that was been a big concern for a lot of people following the Saints was that Alvin Kamara was not looking like himself. So he looked a little bit better today. Michael Thomas is the best wide receiver in the league, and because he's just open all the time. And even when he's not open, his catch radius is ridiculous. He, from a fantasy perspective, he had 25 fantasy points before the end of the first half. It's ridiculous. You would think that the Saints needed a third weapon besides him and Kamara. But it's like Michael Thomas is the third weapon. He's two weapons in one. He's amazing. And Demario Davis is an all-pro. He might be the best inside linebacker in the NFL. He's flying out everywhere.
He did a number on Doyle tonight.
Yeah, there were 3 to 4 passes were on third down where Jacoby Brissett was throwing an out route or a corner route to Jake Doyle, and it got deflected every single time and snuffed out every single time by one man by the name of Demario Davis. And it almost looked identical every single time. It was a phenomenal display. Like, his skill as a coverage linebacker has improved drastically since he's been here. And he's just been good all over the place. It's just amazing.
Yes, exactly. I completely agree with you. It was just great all around. Basically from this, it's a tale of two seasons. The Saints are heading into the playoffs, trying to just get the best seeding. Colts season, basically they were eliminated tonight with this loss. They were officially eliminated from the AFC playoffs. So that's a disappointment. But I think Frank Wright's going to get those guys back and ready next year. I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the rest of the team. I don't think Jacoby Brissett, even though he missed a couple throws tonight, he's not a bad quarterback by any stretch of the imagination. It's just one of those games where it's just the Saints' night, and it just happens like that. Now, you talked about earlier the Tennessee Titans. That's who the Saints play next. Give us a little preview on that. What do you think about that matchup?
That might be, well, for one, the acquisition of Janoris Jenkins for the Saints this evening should help mitigate some problems that the Tennessee wide receivers may cause, because they have a lot of sneaky good wide receivers. That the rookie A.J. Brown, he's having a stellar season. Ever since Tannehill has been taking over the offense, they have rejuvenated themselves. Derrick Henry is a top 3 back in the league right now. Their tight end core is pretty good, and their offensive line has always been sneaky good. So it's going to be a real test, especially since our defense is pretty banged up on the front 7 side, and our corners are not playing to their best ability right now. So going up against offense that seems to be clicking at the right time is going to be a big test for that defense. And the Saints offense, even though it looks like it's running on all cylinders, don't sleep on the Titans defense, because they definitely can. They're definitely a bend but don't break type of defense.
Yeah, definitely. And it's also another chance to get Alvin Kamara going, because a lot of people have been talking about how he hasn't been the same player since coming back from his injury. And I think tonight they definitely made a concerted effort to give him the ball to help, get him back into the flow of the game, especially what happened with the 49ers last week. This win this week definitely takes the bad taste out of their mouth and helps them with a lot of other things down the road. Now, also, talk about the Colts. Next week they play Carolina Panthers. Both teams' seasons are basically over, so that's more of a just maybe play your young guys and just see what you got next year, pretty much, since both of them are out of the playoffs. Tonight definitely, like I said, was a historic night for the Saints, a very historic night for everybody involved in Louisiana. Honestly, Louisiana's just had a great year in terms of football teams. Just LSU making it to the playoffs undefeated, Heisman, Brice, breaking records still. And the crazy thing is about his record, he's going to break it again, because Brady's going to probably pass him, and then he's going to have to pass Brady again. Now, obviously, they're not going to do what they did tonight and celebrate it, because you can't celebrate every single time, but it's going to be interesting to see how, when the end of their careers come to an end, who's going to have the record, because that's basically who's battling for it right now. And it's just crazy to think that both quarterbacks, Drew and Tom, 40 plus years old, still considered elite quarterbacks in the game. It just shows the longevity of these guys, and it's definitely something that, it's amazing to watch, Ethan. Definitely.
Absolutely. So we're going to come right back going into the updated standings in the NFL right now. Coming right up.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's GSMCpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast, where last time we talked about the recap of the Monday night game with the Saints versus the Colts, and now we're going to get into the updated standings of the NFL since that game is played. Brice, what you got for us?
Yes, starting in the NFC, the Packers are now the number 1 seed. The Saints are the number 2. Seattle is number 3. Dallas is number 4. The 49ers are 5th. And Minnesota is 6th. On the bubble, still having a slight outside chance are the Rams. And obviously the Eagles, just because they're still playing for the division. And on the AFC side of things, the Ravens are the number 1 seed. Patriots number 2. Chiefs are number 3. Texans are 4. Bills are 5. And Pittsburgh is 6. With the Titans sitting on the outside looking in. Still with a chance to make the playoffs, though. And it basically, I have to say, I was watching the game and seeing these standings, man. Big matchups coming up next week. Big matchups. Packers play Minnesota next week on Monday Night Football. That's a big game because Minnesota still has a chance to win the division. So that could definitely change and shake some things up. The Saints play the Titans next week. That's big for both teams. The Saints want to continue to win so they can claim and keep a top 2 seed, and the Titans are still trying to play to get into the playoffs. And then obviously Buffalo and New England is another big game because the Patriots and the Bills are fighting for the division crown. If the Bills win next week, they'll be tied with New England for first place in the AFC East. And right now, Ethan, looking at currently who's slotted where, which wild card matchup do you look at and think, oh, that's probably the most exciting matchup if the playoffs started after this week? Because, your wild card teams would be the Seattle and Cowboys in the NFC with the 49ers and the Vikings as the 5th and 6th. And the AFC, it'll be Chiefs as a 3rd going against Pittsburgh and Texans and Bills. So any of those matchups excite you?
Yeah, I think too, to be honest, that Cowboys matchup is always exciting because when it's a Cowboys wild card game, everything on the line, that's when anything and everything will happen for the Cowboys.
Especially with the 49ers coming to town.
Yeah, and that's a historic matchup in a sense that has a lot of history behind it. Cowboys, 49ers, 2 dynasty teams of the old era. That would be just interesting to watch, and I want to see what Jason Garrett would have his team be prepared for. And if the Cowboys can really get the job done, they have all the talent in the world to do that. It'd be interesting to see if they can actually follow through on all that talent and make it worth something and go on a run. But the other team, or the other matchup, I should say, that would probably be the more interesting game for me to watch would be the Bills versus the Texans. Just to see Deshaun Watson go up against that Bills defense and watching those two slug it out, that would be just so fun. That's probably going to be the Saturday game, and it's going to be probably the most interesting game of that weekend, in my opinion. Just because of the matchup potential, DeAndre Hopkins versus Tre'Davious White is going to be an interesting matchup, considering that he's one of the, as in Tre'Davious, has become a top 10 cover corner, arguably top 5 in the league. And he would be going up against DeAndre, who is already a top class wide receiver, and seeing him go up against Deshaun and that front seven of the Bills is just so dynamic. It would just be a really fun matchup to see who comes out on top on that. And of course, it'd be interesting to see if Josh Allen can get to the second round and lead his team to higher platforms and see what they can do.
Yeah, definitely. A matchup I would look forward to if the playoff standings were where they were today would be Seattle and Minnesota, man. That'd be a great matchup. I think Russell Wilson, some people think he's the league MVP this year, and Kirk Cousins has been showing a lot of people up this year, letting them know that he's just not a game manager. Now, some people are still going to be nervous because, this is Kirk Cousins in prime time. This is Kirk Cousins in the playoff game. But I think this would be a great matchup. It's going to be at Seattle, so, the crowd's going to be electrifying at the 12th man. And I think it's going to really come down to, I think, Russell Wilson versus Minnesota's defense, because Minnesota's defense has made some teams look very discombobulated, especially yesterday when Minnesota played the Chargers, and they made Phillip Rivers look pretty old yesterday. So that'd be a great matchup just to see. Also, that's a rematch of the game that happened years ago where the Vikings kicker missed the field goal late that gave Seattle the win. That was, I believe, Teddy Bridgewater's the game that Teddy Bridgewater started for the Minnesota Vikings back at that time. And obviously that game's always lived on with Viking fans because they felt like they should have won that game. They should have moved on to the next round and all of that. What do you think about, so coming back to the next week's playoff matchups, depending on some of these things, how do you feel about the Patriots and Bills next week? Because that's a pretty big matchup. A lot of seeding is on the line. If the Patriots lose, they could drop to wild card. Plus, if the Chiefs win, they jump. Like how big is that matchup? How do you see that matchup going?
How I see it going, I think the Patriots will come out on top only because at the end of the day, that Bills defense is for real, and it needs to be respected in the National Football League from fans and scouts alike. But the Patriots defense is top class as well, and the problem is I don't think we don't have enough evidence to say that we can trust Josh Allen's ability to take that offense down the field against a really, really good defense. And even though he did do it against the Steelers are like the 1B to the Patriots 1A as far as their defensive quality, because Bill Belichick is such an amazing coach that he'll have his team ready and he'll know what to do to try and take away Josh Allen's strengths to really make him force to throw the ball. And throwing the ball against the Patriots is the one thing you really don't want to get into doing because of the Stephon Gilmores of the world on their side of the field. So I really think it will be the Patriots game to lose. But with that said, their offense hasn't been the best either, and their wide receiver core has been noted to just be mediocre, to say the most of it. They, who they got from the Falcons earlier in the year through trade, Sanu, he had a couple drops last game, and they really needed him to step up, but they got a little bit more production from some of their recent signings in the draft. But at the end of the day, they really don't have the weapons that they did even a year ago. And a year ago, people said that they didn't have a lot of weapons around Brady. And now Brady looks like he's definitely getting up there in age. He's looking like a 40-year-old man now, to say the least.
Yeah.
So that game should be really fun to watch and interesting to see the seeding, but it also might be interesting to see just which offense can break the seal on each team's incredible defenses. Yeah,
definitely, and I'm keeping an eye on the Minnesota Green Bay game just because that's a rivalry game, Monday Night Football, big stage. It's basically big for both teams. Packers win, they clinch. Minnesota wins, they have a chance to win the division and move up from a wild card to potentially getting a home playoff game and potentially getting a top seed. And it would just be really, really big for both teams, for one of them to get the win. Packers are coming in here playing good football. Minnesota's also coming in playing good football. Honestly, it's just we're getting to that point in the season where every game is just so crucial for every team that's trying to fight for a playoff spot, trying to get seeding. I don't think anybody's going to rest their starters. Everybody's going to play for any game because every game is important because they're trying to come out here and they're trying to get the best record and best seeding possible, also wrap up divisions. And then, they'll see what happens in week 17. But it's something that definitely is just, this is why we love football. This is why when it gets this late in the year, we really just, this is where a lot of fans really just, come together to watch football because, there's so much going on right now and your team could be battling. So that's always super important.
Yeah, I totally agree. Coming up next, we're going to be talking about biggest impact games from last Sunday. So that includes the Bills game, even though it was a bit of a rough one, the Cowboys versus the Rams game, and the Falcons with the big upset of the week against the 49ers. So that's all coming up next. Or stay right here.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast, where last segment we talked a little bit about the updated standings in the league. And now we're going to get into the biggest games from last Sunday. So, Brice, I'm going to let you go ahead and pick the first that you want to talk about.
Well, the first game I want to talk about is what happened in the Falcons-49ers game. That was probably one of the best games that was on yesterday, and it also had big playoff implications. The Falcons won at the last minute on a Julio Jones touchdown, literally with no time. Well, there was 2 seconds left, and it really came out to the wire. And this is the third time, basically all year, that the 49ers have lost at the buzzer. Most of their games have came and they've lost in the last 3 seconds, and I think this also hurts the 49ers because now they dropped to a wild card spot, and Seattle dropped up to number 1, as like we talked about last segment. What do you think about it, Ethan?
Well, for one, it makes me question what exactly is the ceiling for this 49ers team, as their defense is a bit hurt. As you can see, the defensive line isn't getting as much pressure as they had in weeks prior when they looked to be the most dominant defense. And now they're still pretty good, but they're not clearly as potent as they once were. And also it makes me think that the Saints game was very important for them to win that game because they almost went on a 3-game losing streak at that point. So we really don't know where this team is anymore as far as the playoff potential, if they can make it all the way to the championship, as they were coming into the first or the last 2 weeks as Super Bowl contenders, and now we have to readjust after seeing teams like Minnesota really make a strong case for being a playoff contender that can go a little bit deeper than what we may have already seen. And teams like the Cowboys are getting a bit rejuvenated. So there's a lot of different teams that are clicking right now. And the 49ers, they may have just wet the bed a little bit. They may have taken a game off. But it's definitely something to keep an eye on for sure.
Quick question. Do you think Garoppolo is holding them back?
I don't believe Garoppolo is holding them back. I think he's a serviceable quarterback. I just don't. I think their offense is good. I think they can generate points when need be. Kyle Shanahan might be the best offensive-minded coach in the league, arguably. And sometimes the ball just doesn't roll their way. That's just football. But I think they have the talent to be the best team in the league, clearly, and can beat anybody on any given Sunday. Sometimes you just have to put it all together.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also, you saw the Buffalo game last night?
I did. I watched that entire game. It was definitely a defensive display on both sides of the ball. It was a turnover fest. I believe Duck Hodges, the Steelers quarterback, had 4 interceptions, or at least 4 turnovers on the Steelers side. And my favorite running back on that Bills team, Singletary, who I keep striving for, especially in fantasy, he had a couple fumbles in there that was a bit disappointing to see coming out of him. But the Bills come out with the win in that game, and it was a really hard fought. Josh Allen drove that team down the field last drive, got the score and got the win. And it was an impressive win for that offense because they needed to be able to show they could do that, especially on a defense of the caliber of the Steelers.
Yeah, I feel exactly what you're saying. I agree. Watching the game, I mean, it was one of those typical defensive showdowns. It was just who's going to make the plays, and Buffalo made the plays because at the end of the day, Buffalo's offense might be limited, but we know that in terms of the quarterback matchup last night, that Josh Allen is the better quarterback than Duck Hodges, just because, Duck Hodges doesn't have the experience and he's rookie. And, Josh Allen's been basically a starter for a year, almost 2 years now. And I think this is why he's the future of Buffalo. And I think this is why the Buffalo Bills are going to be a tough out in the playoffs. Not only just because of how great their defense is, but also because the maturation of Josh Allen, his improvement, through the season. He's improved from where he was at the start of the season to now. And I think it's going to be big for them down the stretch because they have a big matchup coming up this next coming week against New England. But, I think if they continue on this, they'll definitely be a tough out when it gets to the postseason, and it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what they're able to do when they get to the postseason, as I believe they are they're going to be in there. They're going to be in the hunt for sure. They might be that first Saturday game or Saturday first window for the wild card games as the AFC playoff picture is starting to make shape of itself. And I think the biggest question for the Bills, if you're a Bills supporter, or just that team in general, is how far can Josh Allen take you? Because that offense really revolves around running the football with Frank Gore and Singletary and trying to hit somebody on a little bit of a play action. But at the end of the day, Josh Allen has to make some of those big time throws that every quarterback has to make in order to keep going on and to make a run at this playoff. And that's really the biggest question coming out of all of this, is that can Josh Allen do it consistently? He did it last night, so we just have to see if he can keep doing that for his team to have a real shot at making a deep run in the playoffs.
Yeah, definitely. You also catch the Cleveland game yesterday. Cleveland losing to Arizona in a very disappointing fashion for Cleveland fans. As officially yesterday, with them losing their 8th game of the season, they have now gone the entire decade without a winning record.
I am not surprised, as I've been watching Cleveland go throughout the season. However, disappointed is probably not the word of choice either. It's a lot more than just disappointment. We thought we were going to get a barn burner of an offense at the beginning of the season, right? And it just hasn't turned out to be that way. And we don't know if it's coaching, we don't know if it's players, if it's chemistry, injuries. All that being said, Cleveland looks to be just out of the playoffs. There's a small sliver of a chance that they could slide in, but it's not very high of percentages. So if you're a betting man, I would not bet that Cleveland will make a wild card spot. And to be honest, they don't really deserve it as how they've been playing. They just don't seem to make the right decisions. Baker Mayfield had a delay of game that was just, what were you doing? Like, it's just simple mistakes that Cleveland keeps making. A lot of simple mistakes week to week. And each time, but it's so hard because they're so talented, you want to count them out. And it's just the toughest thing in the world to see a team that you think can get somewhere because they have all the pieces around them to make something of it, but they keep putting squares in the circle hole instead of putting circles in there. So it's just been a tough time watching that Cleveland team, especially Odell, coming from where he once was as a arguably best wide receiver in the league. Now he's just a shell of himself right now.
Yeah, and we have more on that coming up later, because a lot of stuff's happening in Cleveland. But the Cleveland did come out and say that Freddie Kitchens is going to be their coach long term, even next year. So it'll be interesting to see what happens next year, especially with all the stuff that's happening around the team, because some people just feel like Freddie Kitchens is way over his head. Anything else, Ethan, that standed out to you during this week?
Real quick, the Cowboys versus the Rams. That's another team. The Rams, just when you think you can believe in them again, their defense is clicking. They're starting to figure some things out. Goff isn't looking as shaken up as he has been the past few weeks, and then they just lay another egg. It was a really, really, really sad showcase of football from the Rams. The Cowboys looked good. They looked like they were game busters and world beaters, and you know how that can translate in the Cowboys nation and national media. So I'm expected to see a lot of people hopping back on the Cowboys bandwagon, but it was just a tough outing for the Rams.
Yeah, pretty much. And also with the Rams losing, that guarantees the 49ers a playoff spot, as they clinched it this past week.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and coming up, we're going to talk about some general NFL news, like Cleveland stars are wanting out in Lamar, Pro Bowl votes, people coming off waivers, and that's coming right up.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered. Listen, it's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
And welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast, where last time we were talking about the biggest games from Sunday. So the Bills win, the Cowboys win, and that surprising Falcons game. So now we're just going to talk about some general NFL news. So, Brice, how do you like to start this off?
Yes, I like to talk about what I kind of hinted at last segment about the Cleveland game. There is been some reports coming out of that game saying that Jarvis Landry was basically talking to the Cardinals bench and saying, "Come get me," just like the reports have came out this past week or past couple of weeks about Odell talking to teams, talk about "come get me." And I feel like and they also say other players in Cleveland have said that, and it's not looking good for Cleveland right now because your best players are basically saying they want to leave. And honestly, this whole year has seemed very dysfunctional for Cleveland. I feel like Freddie Kitchens is a little bit over his head, but also he's a first-year head coach, so he's learning on the job. But maybe these players are not like trying to wait on that. Maybe they feel like the culture and what the direction of this team isn't going anywhere. And I feel like Cleveland has a lot of problems right now because you don't really want that, around your franchise, especially with Cleveland having this hope coming into the season, thinking they'll be better than what they were in the past. And then still, they were worse in some times, but they didn't reach expectations that were set after the end of last year.
Right.
So I think all of that is contributing to why people want to leave. Now, whether they actually leave is the question, because if you trade away your best players, now what are your expectations for next year? Now what is Freddie Kitchens going to look like going into next year? So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. What do you think about it?
I don't think that Cleveland is going to be in the business of looking to trade Odell or Jarvis or Njoku if he comes back or any other key players, just because that's just not the nature of the NFL, really. That's just never it's really a lot of outliers of recent time, like at the Antonio Brown situation. So unless something that drastic happens again, I don't think Odell or any other star player on Cleveland will really be shipped off. What I think is going to happen is there has to be some sort of culture change in that front office or in the locker room especially, and they just have to play better. Winning kind of covers a lot of bandages, or winning is the bandage, and they cover a lot of wounds, especially in the locker room. And I guarantee you, if the Cleveland Browns were in the same position, if Cleveland switched positions with the Steelers, right, as far as records, a lot of this stuff would still be kind of underneath the rug, so to speak.
They'd be competing for that playoff spot still and
right.
Still in the running.
And, you know, what I really think is happening is that Baker has lost the locker room for right now, and he has to try and earn that back. Because when all your skill positions are looking at other teams saying, you know, come take me away, you know, trade for me, come get me, let's win together, that's a sign that they don't believe in the offense being run. That can either be through the head coach or the quarterback. And to be honest, I think it's a bit of both. As Freddie Kitchens is, like you just said, he might be in over his head. Some of the decision making and play calling has not been the strongest display that we've seen this season, and just a lot of simple mistakes, boneheaded decisions. For instance, they don't really use Nick Chubb as much as they should. Nick Chubb gets like 15 carries a game, but he'll be so productive. Why don't you give it to him 20, 25 times? Make him run him. Let him run the football.
Especially before Kareem Hunt came back. Because there were some games where Kareem Hunt came back where they weren't giving him the ball as much. They were just kept throwing and throwing and throwing. Especially the Tennessee game to start the year. It was just like, you had some success on the ground. Why don't you run Nick Chubb? I mean, that's what you brought him in here for.
Right.
So, they gotta fix that. They have to fix that. What else is happening around the league?
Flash, Josh Gordon is suspended indefinitely for performance-enhancing drugs, I believe, and the anti-drug policy in the NFL. So, after this is his second team, Seattle still, so it seems to be the end of the season for Josh.
It might be the end of his career, too.
That as well.
Because it took him a year, almost 2 years to get back to the league, this last suspension. Or it was like a year with the Patriots. And this suspension, again, it's just like, you've had so many, you know, and the league's like, well, we already suspended you for a year, so we might just suspend you for 2 years. Or that's why I feel like organizations like the NFL, they like doing it indefinitely. So it's not like, oh, we're going to put a number on it. So it's like, oh, maybe the public could judge us for not suspending them longer or shorter. Indefinitely is just like, you're going to stay away until we feel like you're ready and we feel like you're in a good place to come back. But the problem is he's had chance after chance. And since he's kept messing up, it's almost just like, as a team, you just feel like he's unreliable.
Absolutely,
like,
yeah.
You know, like, if we sign you, can we even count on you to play the season without getting suspended? It's not even injuries. It's just, can you even play just off with no type of off the field issues, you know?
And you know, the one thing, the indefinite suspension is the new wave for the NFL. It's how they handle all their suspensions now until they really get all the facts together. And the next thing is that this really probably is the end of Josh Gordon's football career, and not just because he's suspended for the fourth time since he's been playing. It's also because it's not like he's been a barn burner when he was on the field. He's been in and out, injuries here, inconsistent play, looks out of shape. And that probably is due to him being suspended so many times. He hasn't been able to really get into football shape. And everybody keeps having this thought that, oh, Josh Gordon in 2015 was amazing, one of the most talented wide receivers we've seen. And each time he gets a new opportunity, it gets squandered by another suspension. And then when he comes back, he seems to get hurt. And he always seems like he's not fully 100%. He always has been, when he was on the Patriots last year and the beginning of this year, he still looked about 75% of what he was. And, football players lose a step every now and again throughout their career to where speed is gone, but, they can still produce. And Josh Gordon, I wouldn't say was producing because of his talent, but more so of the product of that Patriot system. And that's why you didn't really see him in Seattle produce nearly as much, and why DJ Metcalf and Tyler Lockett are still the breadwinners in that offense.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll just have to see what happens. But so in other news, Terrell Suggs was claimed off waivers by the Chiefs. How do you think this improves their playoff chances now that they've added a pass rusher since Alex Okafor went down for the Chiefs on Sunday, and now they've added another veteran pass rusher to add to their defense?
Well, I have two things on this. One, it helps he's a great locker room guy. So from all reports that I've seen and since I've watched him, I've never heard anything bad coming out of him as far as leadership ability and just veteran IQ, smart football player. That's just going to be a good addition for any team, really. And second thing is that the Chiefs are starting to figure some things out on defense, so losing a player like Okafor was very hurtful to them. However, it's nice to be able to put somebody in that knows how to play the game of football, understands what he's looking for when it comes to reading offensives, and making the right reads on and just being an all-around good player. And he can still pass rush in this league. So I think it's going to work out well for them, and I hope the best for him in that situation.
Yeah, no, since week 11, just a key note here, the Chiefs have been number one in scoring defense, so the defense, like you said, has definitely figured some things out. And in other waiver news, also the Saints picked up Janoris Jenkins today. That was a big pickup for them. They wanted to add another shutdown corner on the other side beside Marshawn Lattimore, and I think this is going to definitely help them going into the playoffs, going against some of the most potent passing teams like Green Bay and the 49ers and Seattle going into the playoffs. So that's going to be very important for the Saints to get him up to speed with their defense. But in other news, we're going to go to Pro Bowl voting here. Lamar Jackson, in the first results coming out, leads all pro players in Pro Bowl votes. What do you think about that, Ethan?
Real quickly, I think that it's necessary. It's warranted, granted. Congratulations to him on this season so far. He's been amazing to watch. And I hope for the best for him as a player. He's dynamic in all sense of that word. So coming up in a little bit, we're going to be talking a little bit of college football awards night. Joe Burrow, he came in with a rack of awards. Chase Young, Defensive Player of the Year. Head coaching goes to Ed Orgeron. So we're going to talk a little bit about that coming up next.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast, where a little bit last time we talked about Cleveland stars, some Josh Gordon news, Terrell Suggs off waivers for the Chiefs, and a little bit of Lamar Jackson. So now we're going to head into the collegiate level of the football world, where we're going to talk about some award winners. And I think we're going to start off with Joe Burrow.
Yes, Joe Burrow. Man, they've really embraced him down there at LSU after this past season. He's had such a great year for this school and this program. I mean, he's He's really shattered a lot of records. He's done a lot of great things. He's gotten LSU back to where people felt like they should have been for years. He's the quarterback they've always been looking for. He's worked his way up to number 1 overall potentially in this year's NFL draft. And I think he deserved it. I mean, he took home 4 awards. He took home Maxwell, took home Davey O'Brien, he took home the Heisman Trophy, which is the big one. And then his speech after he accepted the Heisman Trophy was absolutely fantastic. And it's always just great to see, these young guys coming from where they came from, working as hard as they've gotten, or as hard as they have to get to this point. And Joe Burrow is just another example of that. He's really helped LSU and just everything around Louisiana, just get back to such a great status, so. But yeah, so what do you think about his speech? What do you think about him winning the Heisman? You think he deserved it? Do you think everything was pretty good? Or?
His speech, he was driven to tears. Ed Orgeron was driven to tears. I was in the private location of my own home, and even I was almost driven to tears, because what he has come from what he came from Ohio State and transferring to LSU last year and having quite a mediocre at best season at LSU in his first go about it, to come to this moment to where he's winning the Heisman. He is dynamic on the field. He is making all the right reads, the right throws. He's winning and in great fashion. Beat Alabama, which is every quarterback coming out of LSU's dream, is to beat Alabama in the last 10 years. He just has it all. He has the charisma, the poise, the quarterbackship, the gamesmanship of being a quarterback. He understands it. He sees it. He looks like a franchise level quarterback. He looks like somebody you want to lock down for the next 15 plus years. And that looks to be projected to be the Bengals, right? Mm-hmm. The Bengals are the last team in the NFL as far as the records go. And it would be really hard to see them passing on a guy, especially an Ohio guy, since he was born and raised in Ohio. It's hard for me to see them passing up on an opportunity to draft an Ohio kid coming straight out, went to Ohio State. It just seems like a match made in heaven for the Bengals to make that type of draft decision.
Exactly, especially since it seems like they're going to move off Andy Dalton. And I feel like with the support he has, he'll definitely be loved by the Bengal fans. There were, even at this past week in the NFL games, there were Bengal fans that had his name with the way they spell Go, Tigers, and LSU. So they're obviously ready for it. And it's crazy because before the season, he wasn't even projected to be top 3. And now he's going to jump all the way up because you really see what he can really do. And I believe his Heisman moment was honestly in the SEC championship game against Georgia, that play where he made 3-4 defenders miss and then threw it all the way to Jefferson. And that really, to me, is what solidified it for him. So, I'm happy for the guy. But in other award-winning news, Chase Young took home 3 awards, also winning Defensive Player of the Year. Chase Young, I feel like, has been one of the most dominant defensive players in college football. What do you think about Chase Young?
He is a monster on the field. It's ridiculous what he is able to do against opposing offensive linemen. He brings terror every time he touches the field. He can do all facets of the D-line edge rush game, 2-point stance, 3-point stance. Coming off the edge, puts his hand placement is impeccable. Bull rush game. He has the whole package. He's the best player in college football. And that's after giving Joe Burrow all the praise in the world. But he is undoubtedly the best player in college football by a long shot. And that's so weird to say that he's probably not going to be the first pick in the draft, at least right now. But he definitely has the talent to be that. I think any other year, he's the first pick undoubtedly in the draft. He's just an amazing talent, amazing player. Ohio State keeps on pushing out great defensive talent that we see that are Sunday ready. So he's a Sunday ready player.
Yeah, exactly. And Chase Young really, like I said, he's very dominant. I mean, in a lot of draft boards, he's projected as number 1 overall player. It's just like you said, it's the importance of positions. You know, he's a defensive end. I think that's what also makes this so incredible for Chase Young, because he's a defensive end and he's so dominant at that position. Because some people feel like he's defensive end, so he's not as significant as a quarterback. But at the same time, pass rush is mainly the most important thing in the NFL right now, because everybody's trying to get to the quarterback. Quarterback is one of the most, if not the most important position in all of football, especially in the NFL, because usually it's shown if you don't have a quarterback, it's going to be very hard for you to get a championship. But it's also important that if you have good pass rushers that can get to other teams' quarterbacks, you're going to have this successful. And that's why Chase Young will be very valued by whoever drafts him. They're going to get, what they sometimes say, the most safe player. Some people may consider Chase Young the most safe player of the draft. The most, he's going to be good. At least he may not be a superstar, but he's going to be good. He'll be in the league for at least 10 plus years. So that's definitely, Chase Young deserved every award he got. And so, last we gotta give more LSU praise here. Ed Orgeron won Head Coach of the Year. I feel like it was very much deserved. A lot of people question Ed Orgeron. You know, a lot of people wonder if he should have had the job. A lot of people wondered if he was the right coach. And I was one of the few people who thought he was. I think that he brought something that Les Miles didn't bring. I feel like he brought an intensity, and I feel like he personifies what LSU is and what Louisiana is. And I think that's why he's so loved. You know, he's done things that, a lot of coaches that have coached LSU have maybe struggled to do, obviously, a la Les Miles since he was most recent. And I feel like him getting them to the college football playoff and beating Alabama and just having this great, fantastic season he's most deserving of this award. So, I mean, Ethan, I'm sure you have the same agreement here on this.
Yeah. So I grew up in a LSU household. Been watching LSU for a very, very long time. I was born into the Les Miles era as well as the Saban era. So I saw them win that national championship. I saw LSU get to a few national championships in the BCS era, excuse me. And since the college football playoffs have started, a few years ago, and LSU is a Division I school that just wants to win, and they know what they have to do that, and that's always to beat Alabama. If you beat Alabama, you will be praised beyond belief. LSU, with Ed Orgeron coaching LSU, there were some doubts, but he's proved it on and off the field. Off the field, he's an amazing guy. I don't think anybody would ever question that. Even before he came, everyone loved him as far as a personality. And he's just so Louisiana. He's crawfish boils, all the 9 yards. But on the field, he's just a leader. He's a leader, a young man, and he knows how to get the most out of every single player that's on that field. And it's just been a real joy to watch him and Joe Burrow grow together as people and as a football commodity. And it's going to be a really tough thing to see it end eventually, either in the championship if they make it or one in the playoff game coming up. It's just been a really fun ride if you follow LSU football, and I hope that he's able to continue the success that he has down there right now. So coming up, for our last little segment before we depart, we're going to bring up some pretenders and contenders between me and Brice for the remainder of the NFL season. So going into the playoffs, we're going to look at some who's faking it, who's making it, who's got the right build for a big playoff push, and who is just skating by. That's coming right up.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
And and welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast, where earlier we were talking a little bit of college football, some award winners, so Joe Burrow, Chase Young, Ed Orgeron as Coach of the Year, and now we're going to bring it back to a little bit of fun for some pretenders and contenders in the NFL for the playoffs. So, Brice, I'm going to let you go ahead and start off with some contenders. Who do you feel is a Super Bowl contender?
I feel like not stating obvious people. So, guys, maybe like a little bit suspect. I think I honestly think the Bills are a legitimate contender.
Really?
Yes, because the one thing about the Bills is with their defense, if the defense plays like we know they can play, they'll always have a chance. And I think that's in the playoff football. You need to be able to run the ball, which they can do. You need to be able to play defense, which they can do. They already play in bad weather in Buffalo, so that's not an issue. They have all the elements of what you would want in a playoff team. And all they got to do is make enough plays offensively and score enough points, and I think they could really legitimately be a team that can make it to the Super Bowl, especially with how the AFC is shaped. Outside of maybe Baltimore, who's looked so dominant, and the Chiefs have had some liabilities, is there really any other team that you really just think, wow, Buffalo cannot beat those guys? I mean, we'll have to see what happens when Buffalo plays New England, because that'll be maybe potentially a third matchup if that happens, but I think Buffalo is definitely a contender for me. Who's a contender for you?
I'm going to go on the NFC side. I'm going to stray away from the kind of regular contenders that we all are made aware of. So like the Seattles, the Saints, obviously the 49ers. But I'm going to go on the side of looking a little bit closer north and not Green Bay. I'm going to say the Minnesota Vikings. And that's because they don't make mistakes. Their run game is legit. Dalvin Cook might be the best running back in the league, arguably. You know, a lot of people say that guy in Panthersville over there.
Christian McCaffrey.
Absolutely. He really is the best. But he's definitely nothing to snuff at. So when you look at a guy like Stephon Diggs, who's having a incredible season, Kirk Cousins is making doubters look a little bit foolish right now. I was definitely a doubter in the beginning of the season, and he just keeps on winning. And he's kind of shaking off that title of a game manager plus, and he's a quarterback. He's quarterbacking that team, and he's doing it at a high level. So, and that defense is for real, and they figured it out. So I would be very, 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 very close paying attention to Minnesota. I'm going to go ahead and say my pretender really quick. And I think that the Rams, even though they still have a bit of a chance, I don't think they're going to be hitting the streets in the playoffs. I think they're done. And just because Jared Goff has really regressed. And I don't know if it's regression by skill or if Todd Gurley meant so much to them. Because Todd Gurley really is the one that has regressed due to his arthritis in his knees, or in his one knee. And it's just, he has not been the same back since last year. And it's so drastic. That team, without a running game, that team really has struggled. And with Cooper Kupp being in and out of the lineup during multiple weeks of the season, and Jared Goff just has not looked like the same guy from last year. And it really makes you question that decision on making him NFL does not have Supermax, but essentially a Supermax quarterback in this league. And now you're trying to understand if he's even your quarterback for the future right now because of just this poor display of football he's put on for the past 6 weeks of the season.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. And my pretender is also in the NFC, and that's anybody who comes out of the NFC East, because the division does not look that good. Both teams are struggling to get in, but somebody has to win it, so someone's going to get a home playoff game. And I just feel like on either end, Eagles, they have no wide receivers, literally, because injuries have really hurt them. Alshon being hurt, Deshaun getting hurt. those have been big injuries for them. They've had to bring in a lot of guys that were a little bit lower on the depth chart or off the street. They have found maybe wide receiver in Greg Ward, but they've really had to rely heavily on their tight ends. And honestly, the Eagles secondary has not played well all season. They have been lit up by multiple secondaries. Even Washington had success against them. Miami, it hasn't been great. The Giants too. It's just they're in these games because they were supposed to have the easiest schedule to end the season, and they're just struggling to get through those games. And then the Cowboys just, I don't trust Jason Garrett. I don't feel like he's good enough from a coaching detailed perspective to get the job done, because they do come off very undisciplined some games. They're inconsistent because you saw what they did to the Rams.
Right.
They completely boat raced them. But then they'll have that game earlier against the Jets where they just got completely outplayed. And just with that type of inconsistency, you really don't know. Like the Cowboys, you would think from a talent perspective have the best chance, but you really don't know. And that's why I think regardless, unless they make us an NFC Championship game of the Super Bowl, Jason Garrett will more than likely be out of the job. But any team from the NFC East in general that come out, I don't see it. I just don't see it, because what can we go off that let us know, like, oh yeah, they're going to make it, you know?
Yeah, and I would also like to add that's my second pretender team is the Cowboys, specifically just because they're so inconsistent, and each time you think they figured it out because their talent is insurmountable, they're about as talented as any team in the National Football League. Their record, honestly, is so disappointing, not only the Cowboys fans, but just NFL fans in general, because they really look like this year they figured it out. Dak was on a tear, but then you realize that they're just beating, for lack of a better term, not good teams. They were not beating world beaters. They didn't beat the Saints. They didn't beat, they played Green Bay, correct?
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe they beat Green Bay. They beat Miami, and we found out that the Rams are not what we think they are, and they're just beating none of the real teams. Teams just skating by, and that's not going to get you going anywhere in the playoffs. Granted, they have a formula in their offense, in their personnel, that should be good for winning playoff football, and that's Ezekiel Elliott, because when you have a run game like they can have, that's a powerful weapon, and their defense flies around. But from the coaching standpoint, from consistency, I just don't see it.
Yeah, I definitely, I don't see it either. I don't see them being serious whatsoever. But, and I guess I'll just throw this one in there. I think, as everybody I think now believes, the Ravens are definitely a contender. They have the most unique offense in the NFL. It's the most different offense in the NFL. I think a lot of teams aren't prepared for it, and I think this is going to give them the advantage. Now, the only thing is that they've played a couple of teams that are going to be in the AFC playoffs, so we'll have to see what happens the second time around. But I just think Lamar Jackson's on a trend right now where I don't think you may be able to slow him down, but you can't stop him. And then they do what they do so well. So I think that's going to be what's really important for the Ravens, because if they have home fit throughout the entire playoffs, I have a hard time thinking that any team can come in there and beat them. The only team that has had success against the Ravens the last 2 years consistently is Kansas City, because the Kansas City beat them earlier this year and they beat them last year. So that may be the one team that can beat them. But outside of that, not a lot of other teams have showed that they can beat Baltimore at Baltimore. And that's why Baltimore is one of the best teams in the AFC, if not the best team in the league in general.
Right, and I feel like that's why for my last contender is Kansas City, because a lot of people were kind of middling about because of their injuries, and their defense was not good at the start of the season, but their defense is picking up and picking up fast. And that was really the only slight against them as a team for Super Bowl contention. And now, when their offense is rolling, they're just as good as the Ravens. And in a shootout between Pat Mahomes and Lamar, it's really just pick of your choice. You don't know who's coming out of that. But that's going to wrap it up for the GSMC Football Podcast for tonight. Thank you for listening. This is also brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask you to please remember to subscribe to the show, write a nice review, leave a thumbs up. That also helps us out. Also, can you please follow us on all of our socials, so Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and have a good night. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.